Welcome back, my fellow strangers, to another episode of Traversing the Strange World. Today on the show, we have an interview I did with Miguel Conner. He is the host of Aeon Byte Radio, or Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio. He also just recently wrote a book, The Occult Elvis. The audio on my end on this episode is less than desirable. Definitely not the best interview I've done as an interviewer from my end. I feel like I could have done much better, but nonetheless, I am extremely grateful for Mr. Conner's time and for coming on the show. So without further delay, Miguel Conner. Don't forget to like and subscribe and leave a little comment too. Let us know your thoughts. I am joined here with Miguel Conner. Miguel's work on Gnosticism, mysticism, shamanism, and Elvis really captured my attention, and so I'm having him on the show today to discuss all those things. Welcome to the show, Miguel.
Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
So, what got you started on this path of? We've discussed Gnosticism a little bit on the show, but my understanding of it's very limited. We read through the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Judas, but that's about the extent of it.
Well, I mean, like many seekers, I was always one of those people looking for the greater questions of life. Why is there suffering? What happens when we die? What's the nature of reality? And so forth. And I was raised Roman Catholic, although my mother was very ecumenical, open-minded, so it was never an issue asking or going to different places, and I kept at it for many years, and none of the systems really satisfied me. Enjoyed them. I like all religions and myth, man's search for something greater than himself. And Gnosticism, as I studied it here and there throughout the years, just started answering the questions satisfactory in a way that I was satisfied with, and eventually that's what I embrace. As an aesthetic, as a philosophy, as a theology, and so forth. Of course, there's always gaps in the system, holes, right. And there's no perfect logical system because at the end of the day, mysticism isn't logical. It never was meant to be. But for me, Gnosticism answered the questions in my journey. And again, your mileage may vary. It's up to you at the end of the day.
All right, so two questions. You can answer whichever you'd like first, but you said mysticism isn't intended to be logical, and I also, what were some of the aspects of Gnosticism that resonated with you and that you found attractive?
Well, the idea that what we were told about the birth of Christianity or the history of Judaism or so many other narratives, mainstream narratives, were not true. That there was much more to the Bible than what we were told. And things like explaining the temper of the God of the Old Testament, how the snake in the garden seems to be the good guy, and so forth. Why were women sort of marginalized like Mary Magdalene and so forth? And then and it just taught me there was a competing form of Christianity, or at least called Christian Gnosticism in those days, that offered sort of the inner path, the high mystic path, and sort of revealed a larger story about creation and everything. And then from a theological, philosophical side, the idea of a simulation, which the Gnostics embraced, made sense to me. Not the Eastern idea that we're in like a playful illusion and so forth, but that we are in a faked reality. It's been coded somehow, maybe by ourselves, maybe by some sort of divine plan, maybe by evil creatures, which the Gnostics call the archons. And they've coded this reality to keep us trapped, either to feed on us or to test us. Again, your mileage may vary. And it just made sense to me about the simulation, also the idea of why do we suffer? Why is there evil? Why does the universe not make any sense? Why does humanity not make any sense? And the idea that we are probably controlled and trapped here. And also the idea of an inner knowing. As Peter Gabriel said in The Carpet Crawlers, you got to get in to get out. This idea that the way out is to going inward into finding out who we truly are beyond all the programming and that has been given to us by, our family, society, and all that. And within us, there is, as the Gnostic said, a divine spark, something great that has a mission. Also, too, the idea that there's a divine feminine that balances the divine masculine, which Gnosticism provides in the stories of Sophia and Mary Magdalene and so forth. The ideas of technology, the Gnostics kind of certainly a rift from the Book of Enoch, the idea that the archons use technology or hand us these things to keep us preoccupied, and they are double-edged swords and so forth. And also, and the idea that reality may be fake, but there's levels of reality that we can explore, and sounds very much like different dimensions. So Gnosticism certainly was something that answered my questions, but I realized really fit into modern times, really better than any religion, especially they were saying these things 2,000 years ago, and it just makes sense to me.
There definitely seems to, at least on the internet, be a surge of Gnostic thinking out there popping up here and there.
Science, a lot of it, science supports it. So that gets people interest, and also
from what I've gathered, also it supports the idea of something else that is popping up in society, which is the simulation. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I did. That we are in a fake coded reality by some form of higher intelligence. And again, this is something Neil Bostrom wrote about it, and people like Elon Musk and Neil deGrasse Tyson, very secular guys, ran with it, and it seems to be, as they say, a mathematical probability. It's higher than 50%, let's put it that way, in their model. So it just became, and of course, quantum physics has shown us how bizarre and brittle our reality is. The Newtonian paradigm is falling apart. So the simulation just, it makes sense. And again, this is something the Gnostics were talking about 2,000 years ago. They got mocked, lambasted, and persecuted for daring to say that. No, the architecture of the universe is in harmony, and God just created the perfect, beautiful world, and yada, yada, yada. So that's something that the Gnostics have found themselves to be right.
So this might sound completely weird, but until a couple of years ago, I grew up super religious, Messianic Judaism or Messianic Hebrew Roots movement. You might be familiar with either of those terms. I deconstructed from that and really kind of took an agnostic path. And I had really distanced myself from anything spiritual, kind of like really mostly listened to like Sam Harris types, people, logical atheist. But a few years ago, a Native American fellow, he gave me psilocybin mushrooms, and I started microdosing for like a couple months. I made like an eighth last like a couple months, so I was really milking it out. But in this process, I started to think about like spirituality again, and I started to like ask these questions that I feel like I had repressed it. I pushed it down, and whatever the properties of this is, it unrepressed it, unleashed it. And one thing amongst these spiritual ideas that I started entertaining again is like the idea of a simulation. I started seeing it everywhere, whether it be like in mythology with like the Greek gods or the Mesopotamian gods coming in and being like maybe avatars. Like I know if you were a higher being coming into this simulation, you'd kind of want to pimp out the body that you're coming into it. So that made sense to me, or like the idea of a soul being like just somebody outside of this technology, this simulation that we're in. So yeah, that was really exciting to hear that's an idea that you entertain.
Yeah. I mean, Gnosticism is shamanistic at its core. Comes out from the Egyptian mysteries. So it's the idea that, we have a brain and we should use it, but at the end of the day, the experience of the spirit world, that's where the real gold is. That's where the insights are. As a scholar, Stephen Davis, said, Gnosticism is really about the idea that we were once God and we forgot we were God, and thought we were human and in this planet Earth, and what are we going to do to reverse it? And their way is... as many Gnostic texts, even the Gospel of Thomas that you quoted says the way of ascent is the way of descent. How do we get back to when we were higher than the gods or higher than this world or more whole. And again, that's through a shamanistic experience, a travel to the spirit world to really make contact with higher forms of consciousness and even our past selves. So that's certainly one reason I like Gnosticism too, because it wasn't about following rules or beliefs or all that, which is fine. That's what some people need to get through life, and that's fine. I used to be that way, but some people want an experience of the divine, and that's what Gnosticism, the mystery religions, and shamanism ultimately did. If you read most Gnostic texts, it does provide, these philosophical, we're in a simulation and the archons, and this is the real story of Jesus and so forth. But it also has these ecstatic rituals. We can't construct them because it doesn't provide a lot of things, but we can see that there were these ecstatic rituals, and some of them probably involved some sort of psychedelic, but whatever it was always about finding an altered state of mind, whether it was entheogens, meditation, some did sex magic, some did sacramental work. It really depended. Gnosticism is very individualistic. It starts with like, what works for you, but it might not work for me. Whatever you can do to get an altered state of mind and have an experience with the spiritual world.
Excellent. Yes, I would say since hopping back on the spiritual path, this podcast, it's a big part of that, just exploring ideas, discussing ideas open-mindedly. That's a big aspect of it. And two that have really stuck out to me, that really resonate with me, are both shamanism and mysticism. We interviewed a shaman a couple times, and I haven't had a chance to interview a mystic. What are, other than like the Gnostic Gospels, Judas, Gospel of Thomas, Gospel of Mary Magdalene, are there any like more recent works like Gnosticism?
Oh yeah.
Like what is kind of like would be like the evolution of Gnostic literature? Just to name drop a few big ones.
Ooh, there's so many that most people miss. You can look at the works of William Blake, England's poet. He was definitely influenced by Gnosticism. Herman Melville, Moby Dick is a Gnostic tale. Moving further, Robert Frost, America's poem. He was very influenced by Gnosticism. He even has a poem called The Demiurge's Laughter. And then in more modern times, some of our biggest cultural movers have been influenced by Gnosticism. Carl Jung, very much his depth psychology, is influenced by his experiences with the Gnostics or experiences of Gnosis. Philip K. Dick, perhaps one of today's greatest science fiction writers, whose movies were adapted into Blade Runner, Total Recall, Minority Report, had a lot of Gnostic experience and was very influenced by the Gnostics. William Burroughs, too, the great the beatnik writer who gave us so much modern things, very influenced by Gnosticism. Who else? So you can read their works and find a lot of Gnostic Gospels, and then in the movie form, obviously, you have the late 90s surge of Gnostic films like The Matrix, Dark City, The Truman Show, The 13th Floor, so many others that had Gnostic themes too. And even today, I mean, it's all over the place. Even if you look at a show like Severance, which is very popular on Apple TV, has Gnostic themes. Stranger Things, big time Gnostic themes. I mean, the story of El and Vecna parallels the story of Sophia and the Demiurge. The term Demogorgon, although they got it from Dungeons and Dragons, is really a term that the Enlightenment thinker Voltaire used for the Demiurge, for the bumbling god of the Old Testament. And the Stranger Things uses terms like prison world and simulation and all that. So, yeah, in the art and literature, there are so many examples. Cormac McCarthy, A No Country for Old Men, his novel, well, he uses Gnostic themes in a lot of his works, but his novel, Blood Meridian, is a bona fide Gnostic gospel. So it's all over the place. I mean, as Stephen Heller, the Jungian and Gnostic bishop, once said, Every serious artist is already half a Gnostic, because when you really go deep into the nature of humanity, into reality, into what is going on to the world, you're going to automatically run into some Gnostic themes because they're true, probably. Doesn't mean you're going to turn into a Gnostic, but you're certainly going to use them. Even Stephen King, I don't know if you've read It or The Dark Tower, but his creation of
All right, we had a little bit of technical difficulties, but we're back on air. So, yes, I had just asked you about a brief history of like Gnostic literature, and I think that the my internet couldn't handle it and it shut down, or maybe it's the Demiurge plotting.
probably, yeah, always the
Yeah.
Demiurge.
So, as you were saying before, we were interrupted.
Yeah, I lost my train of thought, so we have to go to the next question. You get inspired and then you lose it.
Okay, so you had mentioned a little while back about mysticism. It's not supposed to be logical. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, I mean, the ideas, for example, of reason and language and all that, those are sort of recent human inventions. And the idea that time is linear and all that, as philosopher Owen Barfield said, once we created language, our reality changed. And I think that's true. William Burroughs said that language was actually an archon. It was a being that kept us from seeing the truth. And time was the other archon too. And I understand these are evolutionary steps that help us survive and live better, live longer, invent antibiotics and all that great stuff that we need today. And I'm grateful for. But ultimately, as it keeps us away from a higher truth, and I don't know if your listeners or viewers, are familiar with the words of Bernardo Kastrup or Donald Hoffman or so many of the real new scientists who are showing about how we live in a simulation and are trying to figure out and realizing that we need new models to describe the universe, and things, again, like language, traditional science, the Newtonian models are keeping us constrained. So logic itself isn't going to do it. So what do we have? We have the experience. We have that ecstatic experience with the divine. How do we express it? Well, like we did before we accepted language and linear time and all that, through myth, through symbols, through art. That's the language that we can speak to each other, because that's really what our brains are made of still, symbols, patterns, and all that. So at the end of the day, people want to look for a logical religion, and you see people debating on the internet why my religion is logical and yours isn't, whether it's Course in Miracles or the Ortho Bros or anything, and they're trying, but at the end of the day, it is the experience, and it's going to go beyond logic.
And you had mentioned about kind of pushing against the idea from India of like this being like a positive experience, a deity having a positive experience like Maya. Perhaps it's more cruel. You were hinting towards that.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole idea. What's the universe? Krishna getting to know himself, or the idea that life is a game that cannot be won but must be played. It's the universe going through all these iterations and playing with itself and all that. And in some forms of Gnosticism, some groups would agree. It is, we don't live so much in a prison, but a cosmic gym. And some Gnostic groups said, yeah, we were part of the divine, trying to understand and trying to experience every permutation that has ever existed. Unfortunately, in this universe, you and I are experiencing one of them, and for some people, it really sucks, right? But that's just the way the universe is. But it's still a simulation. It's been coded on purpose like a video game to send us on a quest or an adventure that eventually does have an end as we go back to the divine, or we play our game and then are summoned back. But some other Gnostics group were like, no, F this, this is not, cancer and death and, pedophilia and all that stuff. No, this is a prison. This is the highest level of hell. This is a penal colony or a cosmic crazy farm or something like that. So we have been trapped because, and many Gnostic texts say that these beings are keeping us as slaves, and they might feed on our very essence, our very soul, our louche, our divine spark, like in in the Matrix, when the Matrix feeds off the electricity of our brains. And it is our job. We're never going to be free, trapped here for all these cycles, that we find a way to escape through the spiritual technology that the Gnostics call Gnosis, which is, again, going back to shamanism, that direct experience with the divine. And we can eventually transcend this universe and wake others up to their destiny of getting out and collapse the simulation of the Demiurge and the Archons. So those are, again, the Gnostics, very individualistic.
Yes.
They didn't agree on everything. They had no problem arguing about it, and I don't blame them. Sometimes I'm walking out into the woods and I'm like, oh, look at the birds, look at the geese flying, and then I see some bird with a broken wing and it's about to die. I'm like, oh, this is terrible. I can go from this is holy to this is terrible. So sometimes what time of the day you catch me is what kind of Gnosticism I embrace.
Well, and as some aspects of shamanism touch on, you could have multiple parts of yourself, fragmented parts of yourself, I don't think they necessarily associate the self with just being entirely one person.
No, and that's what Gnosis or Gnosticism says, that we are ultimately constructs that have been programmed and created and molded through society, through higher forces, and our job is to find, again, that divine part, that true part of ourselves that does have a mission, that can make a difference in the world, and can go beyond the matrix and see and experience higher worlds.
Right. So you mentioned about some Gnostics, they see everything as just totally bad. You perhaps see it as do you believe the nature of this reality is that of a cruel teacher, to where it's cruel, it's hard, we suffer, but it is aimed towards something better? Or are we just like a blinded God? Are we gods that have been blinded and we're trapped? Or is it a exercise?
Well, it can be all of the above, right? Ultimately, it's an exercise. You can read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, and he was in a concentration camp, and he decided he was going to bring it meaning while still getting through. Others might despair. So I don't think this is our home. I do think we are trapped in some sort of simulation, and each of us is just a walking fraud, made to believe that we are meat sacks, and I think we can rise higher. And I do think there are entities out there who probably want to enjoy eating us. We're their dinner. I mean, that's the law of the universe, right? Everything must feed on something else, and it probably is that way in the spirit world. In fact, shamanism does say that, right? When the shaman goes into the spirit world, not all spirits are kind. Some have an agenda. Their morality is not, 2025 human morality. They have other agendas. They are hungry, and in many of these myths, the shaman is torn apart like Osiris, and he must put himself back together. And I think, what's the statistic? 90% of human civilizations have an idea of evil spirits or evil entities. So I think that's true, and I think the Gnostics simply dialed it up to 11. It wasn't just, it's not just the Anunnaki or the Watchers or the Olympians as these mega powerful beings called the Archons, ruled by the Demiurge, that control the entire universe, the entire architecture of the galaxy. They control fate, they control time and everything, and they're probably feeding on us. And again, we can use our human morality on them all we want, but that's not going to change anything. Call them bad. The point is, our responsibility, regardless if this is a good or bad cosmos, is to wake up and to go inward and to experience this spiritual world. So it doesn't matter what the plot is out there. Our mission is the same, man.
I just realized, I'm speaking with you having dipped into Gnosticism and shamanism a little bit, but for some of our viewers who this is their first time clicking on an episode like this, can you give a rundown of some of the cosmology of the Gnostic Gospels and where you relate to it and diverge from that?
Well, I think it starts very much, The Gnostics would agree with the Hindu and even Buddhist scriptures. It starts with there's one form of consciousness, undivided consciousness.
The
And
monad.
then the monad, there's different names, the God above God, the one. They took, they're drawing from Plato. A tomb in the Egyptian lore is this undivided snake that's just doesn't know anything. It's just pure awareness. And then this awareness or consciousness tries to know itself, and as it knows itself, it begins to fragment. Who am I? So as soon as you say, who am I? There's two. These two have a dialogue, and it begins to emanate out into characteristics. Then the characteristics emanate out into experiences, potentials, worlds, Hey, let's experience suffering. Let's experience what it is to be mortal. And it just goes out and out. And in Gnosticism, again, some of the Gnostics said, well, this is great and all, but it's doesn't make sense. There must have been a mistake somewhere, a glitch. And some say, well, that's how you get stronger, right? Iterations break down on purpose. That way we can get stronger and know better. But regardless, there was some cosmic cataclysm. Usually with the Gnostics, there's a rebellion with the wisdom of God called Sophia. She rebels. She's thrown out of the mind of God, or the pleroma as they called it. And she becomes so sorrowful and angry and lonely that her emotions get her pregnant, and she gives birth to the Demiurge, which the Gnostics often associated with the God of the Hebrew Bible, although sometimes they associated him with Kronos or any of the ruling gods that were out there, Osiris. And he takes her power and he creates the universe, but he must feed. So he has to steal some of the heavenly or divine force of Sophia, which is us. And so he hides this divine force into these people called humans, which is us, fools us into thinking he's the real God. And then he and his archons, who he creates, suddenly are ruling this universe. And it's sort of his playground and feeding ground. So, and the only way to defeat him is through Sophia, her rescue operation of us, her children, or often from the divine realm, this being called Christ comes down, and he comes down to awaken us. And that's it. I mean, in the Gnostic cosmology, there's no big fight, or people go, well, why doesn't the Gnostic God help us? Because all he is information. Matter is just nothing. It's an illusion. There's nothing to change or manipulate. This is like holy information. These Gnostic revealers appear, whether it's Jesus or Sophia or through their human others who have awoken, like Mary Magdalene or Zoroaster or Hermes Trismegistos. When they awaken, then they are there to help us awaken. That's the whole point of the Gnostic saga, is awakening one person at a time, and then being able to rise up and make contact with this, the one, or this undivided consciousness, and for us to help others wake up. And eventually, if we all wake up and leave this world, then the simulation will collapse. So that's sort of a short version, truncated version of the Gnostic myth. And I agree with some of it. Yeah.
Where do you disagree?
I don't think I disagree. I mean, again, when they're talking myth, and it's hard to disagree with a myth, right? It's, what people say is myth is not it's not history, it's the eternal history. It's the truth above truth. It's the language of the spirit. It's a way to communicate what cannot be communicated in human terms. So I can't, it's like none of these, I don't know if these details are even real, but I feel they're real. What does Morpheus tell Neo? There's something wrong with this world, but you don't know what it is. It's like a splint in your mind driving you mad. And Morpheus can explain all day long about the simulation, but Neo has to take the red pill and experience everything. He's got to see the whole thing and experience the whole adventure before he can understand it. So I can't go, well, that detail's wrong or this, because it's myth. It's the language of the spirit. It's what's true, but can't be described.
I could definitely see that. I could definitely see how that could fit into a simulation framework. The highest form of God being information, perhaps being the data, the AI that is at the very core of what this technology, this simulation that we're in. It's what makes the motherboard move. It's the brain behind it. and
Exactly.
in a certain sense is everything, even the characters. But the characters are lost within the dream, playing, not knowing that they are also made of the same data that moves the whole computer, the whole game.
Very true. Yeah, and you can look at the Archons and the Demiurge, and they do kind of act like AI and algorithms. They tend to have sort of a lizard brain because, again, they're hungry. So they will act sometimes in very savage ways, but sometimes, most of the time, they're trying to manage the simulation to keep us happy with phones and movies and sex and all that stuff that distracts us. Paying bills and so forth.
Right. There was a story that a shaman told me of somebody had taken, I believe it was an ayahuasca trip, and they came back saying they came off from the trip saying that I met lizard people and they told me that they were ruling the world. And the shaman said that's what they always tell people.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, I've had a few ayahuasca trips, some out of body, and as soon as I'm rising and I look down, everything's like a simulation, a computerized simulation, digital and all that, and it's just, and you could say, well, what's a simulation? The point is that there's a higher and more real reality out there. People, we use different languages and myths of our time. And again, Gnosticism works because of how the science is proving it. But, in medieval times with the Cathars or the Kabbalists, it was simple. They didn't say simulation. They simply said it was a better, higher, more real experience. And I'm sure I'm sure you felt it, right? You've had a dream, you've had a trip, and you feel just flooded with this emotion that's so incredible, so pure. And you feel like you're in this pure, amazing, unadulterated reality of bliss. And then it goes away, but you're like, damn, I can't explain it, but man, that felt good just for a glimpse. And you're like, I know it's out there. How do I get back to it? That
Like you're standing in a river where ideas flow past you like salmon flowing down a river, and they're alive, and you grab hold of them. And
or you meet a dead relative or a pet, and you're so full of love for this thing. You know what I mean? I love that you barely experience in this world, but you feel this like huge, beautiful connection with this relative that's visiting you or a pet or someone. And you're like, this is not of this world. I don't care if this is a simulation. I want part of this world.
Yes. So one of the strangest things I saw in that state, me and some friends were having a bonfire, and I took some mushrooms and I went on a walk because I like being by myself when I'm doing that. And I started listening to When the Man Comes Around by Johnny Cash while I was on my walk. And I remember walking and feeling like I had to puke. And I was bending over and I closed my eyes and I saw these numbers on a screen. And they were like dialing down. They were going down to zero. Then when they reached zero, it was like the numbers like on a old classic watch that you would have, on your wrist that's made of lines. Well, the lines came apart and they formed this, what looked to me like an A. And in the center of the A was a man meditating. And I remember thinking to myself, oh, that's God. I don't know why I thought that, but it's just like, oh, hey, that's God, like in the most chill way. And that was the most visual thing other than that, it's always been like, snakes moving across the wall or, snake eyes or a lion roaring out of the wall. But that was like the most I still visually remember what it looked like.
Yeah, it's something else. And the symbolism, again, snakes, that's something the Gnostics worshipped and promoted or sometimes saw as a dark thing, both light with their ideas of the Ouroboros, the universe created by a snake. The Demiurge is often depicted with the head of a lion and the body of a snake. So, yeah, these things were definitely in their mind, in their mythical mind.
I've heard some say that some Gnostics say that it was Christ who came as the serpent to tell Adam and Eve, to open them up because the Demiurge had in the Garden of Eden given them the illusion of being in this fake paradise.
Yeah. They definitely did that. They definitely, I think the Manichaeans equated, the Nassenes and they equated the serpent with Jesus because Adam and Eve were trapped to be slaves or to be chattel or food to be fed on, and the snake comes to, again, wake them up. It's the theme of awakening, so they could eventually escape.
So amongst mystic, shamanistic figures in the world, there's one that you had mentioned that kind of caught my surprise, but I really enjoyed exploring that angle. Elvis, and I've heard you say that there's two types of people. There's Elvis people and the Beatles people. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's not my rule. That's actually Quentin Tarantino. And yes,
Hell yeah!
and you have to go watch Pulp Fiction. Now, you have to get the original release of Pulp Fiction because he took it out. He didn't like the scene. This is a scene where Mia Farrow is filming Vincent Vega. Uma Thurman's filming John Travolta in the house before they go on their date. And Quentin Tarantino took it out because during the 90s, when the cameras became so cheap or affordable, all these Hollywood movies were doing, the scene of the guy filming the girl or the girl filming the guy. It's like a movie trope you see all the time. Yeah. And he thought it just cheapened that scene, so he took it out. But I'm sure it's on YouTube. But in this scene, Uma Thurman is filming John Travolta, and she goes, there are two types of people in this world. The only two types. There are Elvis people or Beatles people. Now, they can like each other. That's fine, but you cannot be both. And someday you have to choose and make your stance. So that's where I took it from. And I always thought I was a Beatles person, but again, ayahuasca had other plans for me because one of the things you have to learn when doing entheogens is don't have an agenda. Don't tell your ego, I want to see God or I want to solve my trauma. Or no. Let the plant or the spirits decide what you should do. What's your path? They'll take care of the rest. So I did ayahuasca, and suddenly this Elvis voice came to me and said, you got to write this book. And I wrote The Occult Elvis, and I became an Elvis person. That's where I am today. I still listen to the Beatles, but I'm an Elvis person. And when I say at the end of the book, it's kind of an Elvis person is basically a shaman. One, because Elvis, as I write in the book, he always wanted to make contact with God. He was always experienced the spiritual world. He was always doing shamanistic rituals. I mean, that's something that consumed him as much as his rock star life, but it's kind of been overlooked.
What are we at on time? I can't see my clock right now.
I'll give you 10 minutes.
All right. So what, as opposed to that, what is a Beatles person? Because you would think you would associate that with shamanism or at least yogis.
Yeah, I'd say phonies.
Phonies.
Yeah, I think the Beatles was constructed by the powers that be as probably some mind control or social engineering. Now I think later on, yeah, I would say so too. But I think later on, John Lennon broke from his I think they started to break from their programming once they started getting serious about their spirituality, and John Lennon met Yoko, and they did break away. Maybe they killed Paul. I mean, the evidence is pretty fascinating. But and so I do admire what John Lennon did and George Harrison and Paul McCartney, how they were able to, well, I don't know about Paul, but break away from their programming and do their own thing, and in many ways expose what had been done to them and what society was done. Certainly John Lennon did it, and who knows, maybe that's why he had to go, right? I don't know.
How does Jim Morrison from The Doors translate in terms of these shamanistic, archetypal rock stars?
Well, he would definitely be one like Elvis, because he was directly interested in shamanism and visited tribes and studied the old mystery religion. So yeah, no doubt with Jim Morrison. Jim Morrison had two big influences, was like Frank Sinatra and the Crooners and Elvis. That's how he based his persona, those two figures. But he was very much into shamanism, the mystery, Nietzsche, all that. He was a very educated guy. Also, like Elvis, wanted to know God, wanted to experience the spirit world. So yeah, Jim Morrison would definitely be the archetypal image of the shaman for this country, along with Elvis.
I like that. What about how about Johnny Cash?
Oh, him too. I mean, obviously he and Elvis were friends, and they came from the same churches too. Have to remember people like Johnny Cash and Elvis and B.B. King and these other guys, Little Richard. came from the Pentecostal movement. And the Pentecostal movement may have been very fundamentalist, but it was also an experiential type of Christianity, right? You read the Bible, but your services was you dancing for hours until you went into an altered state of mind. Now, they may not be summoning Dionysus or Apollo or well, there were these gods to invade them, but they were summoning the Holy Spirit. In fact, scholars have noted that Pentecostals, their rituals are very much like the Gnostics or mystery schools of ancient time. It was an experiential, altered state of mind, but it was just clothed in Christian mythology.
Makes me think of the state that shamans tap into from the drum. Yeah,
that's it. I mean, because when Elvis was a kid or Johnny Cash, they would spend hours, sometimes outside, drums, guitar, and they'd be singing "Save Me, Jesus." But I mean, if you're doing this for hours and you're shaking and moving, you don't even need drugs. You're going to naturally go into an altered state of mind. So Johnny Cash and Elvis, they were all about experiencing God. Now, Johnny Cash always stayed with Jesus. Elvis he went more with the cosmic Jesus, the Gnostic Jesus. He started going into theosophy and Buddhism and all these. He kind of increased his toolbox of who was Jesus and who was God. Johnny Cash pretty much stuck to the Jesus of the Bible, but they were both about experiencing God.
And I've heard you also touch on David Bowie as one of those shamanistic rock star types. What is I'm vibing with what you're putting down, but for viewers, listeners, what's the archetypal definition of this shamanistic person, that rock star?
Well, you have to remember, I mean, when people like Elvis and Johnny Cash and Little Richard came out and they were doing their shows in the early mid 50s, when critics would go down, they'd be like, this is a holy tent revival. This is an experience, people dancing and, touching each other. That was a criticism with the Pentecostals, that they were mixing sex and salvation because, you're dancing there with snakes or whatever. You're rubbing against men and women. It's almost like a little bacchanalia without drugs.
Yeah.
So it was shamanistic. And of course, their music also became influenced by the blues, the blues and gospel, which was very tapped into the African shamanism that had come, through Africa in the deep South during the Depression. And this mixture created something called rock and roll. In fact, the term rock and rolling was a term of when somebody got invaded by the Holy Spirit and went into an altered state of mind. It used to be called rock and rolling. So this sort of religion came out through these cats, like, again, Elvis, Little Richard, Johnny Cash, and all those guys. And it really was a spiritual movement. It was shamanistic by any term. I mean, you're there in the audience. This person can see into your soul. He can heal you with his music. He knows you're broken. This person is sending you into an altered state of mind. And I think that's the essence of rock and roll, whether it's the Doors, the Grateful Dead, even Taylor Swift. She knows how to get all these, 20,000 women in the stadium on her wavelength and share this energy. So I think that's what rock music was meant to be. And those who understood it, whether it was Elvis, Jim Morrison, David Bowie, you name it, they knew to tap into this mystery religion, shamanistic vibe and create a spiritual experience. And we've all been to concerts and we know it really is an experience.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
A spiritual experience.
Absolutely. Yeah, and when you think of the shaman as like a bridge man, right? A man who
healer, a bridge,
who connects from the unknown, the subconscious, the strange world, and brings it to the known world. He builds the bridges, he connects the dots. And music being something so strangely and overwhelmingly spiritual, I could certainly see the role of a rock star being very shamanistic.
And remember, shamanism, there's always two very important features: theatrics and music. Loud music, big costumes. That's what the shamans roll throughout history, and that's what these rock and rollers, Elvis, David Bowie, Ozzy Osbourne, who was an Elvis freak.
Right here, yeah.
Yeah, he
For
was a
sure.
big Elvis guy. We all know that. So they knew that was part of the spirituality. It wasn't just entertainment. And they'll tell you, it's like there's nothing like connecting with our fans. It's like we become one. There's an egregore created. So that's, I think, the essence of rock, and that's what the real shamans, again, Elvis, Jim Morrison, David Bowie, and all the others, they knew how to do it.
Certainly. Yeah, no, music, and it's interesting. The time I was deconstructing, Pink Floyd in particular, was their music was like a bridge that kind of helped me pass through that Red Sea of belief that I was going through. I was in Egypt and I needed to get out of that. You know, I would say my agnosticism, since I would say I still am agnostic because I see everything as a mystery, as unknowable, but there is something, sublime beneath it all, right?
Yeah,
But
that it's a mystery.
yes, and
I mean, which is weird because, yeah, Pink Floyd, God, it was like therapy when I was a kid, and seeing them in concert and saved my life, even though Roger Waters, he's obviously an atheist and the lyrics are. No, there are times, I mean, you listen to something like Echoes, and I'm like, oh my God, that song really taps into the unknown
Yep.
of creation. It's one of the most spiritual songs I've heard. So
all 23 minutes of it.
Huh?
All 23 minutes of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, remember, I was young. You get stoned, you lay down, and you put on metal, and you just woo.
There's only about 5 minutes of singing in that song, but
also, I mean, obviously, Roger Waters, like David Bowie, a lot of the songs are about mental health.
Yes.
And as Carl Jung said, the Gnostics were really understood the ideas of the psyche, because to them, religion was God going crazy or forgetting who he was and becoming these dysfunctional creatures called humans. So even from a mental state, you're kind of playing to the Gnostic idea, because the Gnostics were obsessed with mental health and a lot of things like schizophrenia and paranoia. People have noticed they were describing that 2,000 years with the archons and so forth. And it became codified in our era. So even mental health is sort of spiritual, because as the Gnostics said, and the Hermeticists, we are housed in the universe, but the universe is housed in our head. This is how, we go in, we fix our mind, and the mind can do anything. It can open doors. But we went crazy. We're fragmented.
I think a good word also there is insanity, especially like repeating itself over and over. That's like life. That's like if you believe in reincarnation, repeating it over and over and over. It's like reincarnation is like God going insane.
Yeah, that's it. And
experiencing insanity.
Horrible. Memory wipe, doing the same thing. Yeah. Groundhog Day.
Groundhog Day. All right. Well, I know you said about 15 minutes ago that you had 10 minutes left, so we'll put an end to this. I very much appreciate your time today, and appreciate everything that you had to bring from the unknown to us fellow strangers. So let me say my spiel that I say at the end of every episode, which is let's keep traversing this strange world with curiosity and inquisitiveness, and let's not forget to have some swag. And since we kind of just walked into this life thing, let's remember to be neighborly to folks, because at the end of the day, we're all just strangers in a strange land. So until next time, thank you. Until next time, peace.
This is the outro. See you next time, strangers.